morning. Happy Constitution Day.
Happy Constitution Day, everyone. Welcome to the National Constitution Center. It is wonderful to see all of you here to learn about the Constitution and be inspired by our founding ideals. And it's so exciting that we get to talk this morning with Justice Neil Gorsuch, the honorary co-chair of the National Constitution Center. He's joined by his co-author, Janie Nitze. Please join me in welcoming Justice Gorsuch and Janie Nitze. Justice, we're so honored that you're here on Constitution Day. Why don't we start by talking about the history of Constitution Day? What is Constitution Day?
Well, and Janie, I want you to chime in here too. It was started about 100 years ago by a woman who had immigrated from Poland after the Russian Revolution to escape communism. And she loved this country so much and the opportunities it had given her, she wanted to throw a party to celebrate the Constitution. And so she did in her Long Island home, and they dressed up in revolutionary outfits, and they had marching bands, and they threw a big party. And a newspaper publisher at the time thought that was such a great idea that he said other cities should follow suit. And soon it became one of the biggest holidays in the American calendar. Hundreds of thousands of people would gather in Central Park, in Philadelphia, and all around the country to celebrate the Constitution. And that's how it got started. There's some very famous speeches. John F. Kennedy gave one of the great speeches on Constitution Day when he was a congressman in Mineola, New York. And he said, the flames of the Constitution and our freedom really depend upon education and the next generation knowing how the Constitution works and what they can do under the Constitution to secure our freedoms in the future. Janie?
The only other thing I would add to that is it was actually originally called I'm an American Day,
Yes.
which I think is really cool because it was there to celebrate being American and sort of patriotism and love of this country. And later it was changed to Constitution Day. It was moved from May to September, the date that the Constitution was signed, September 17th. But sort of I love that history, and you know, there was huge celebrations in honor of it, and Albert Einstein gave some talks on Constitution Day as well, and so it really has sort of rich history, and I'm glad that the National Constitution Center is sort of reviving this great gathering for the day.
Well, and you should know a little bit about Janie. So her family came to this country to escape communism from Czechoslovakia too. And she's a first-generation American and managed to get into Harvard and get 3 degrees from Harvard, and then she clerked for both me and for Justice Sotomayor on the Supreme Court. And she's one of the most remarkable young women of her generation that I know. And she has here today with her 2 of her daughters. Where are you? There they are. Claudia and Anne. Will you say hello?
Will you wave, guys? Wave.
Yeah, there they are. And they're celebrating Constitution Day with us.
Beautiful. So wonderful to welcome all of you here. Janie, maybe say a word about what it's like to clerk for Justices Gorsuch and Sotomayor.
It will not surprise you that I often get this question. Sort of 2 justices appointed by presidents of different political parties, but really it is exactly the same to clerk for them. The job is the same, and they both approach the job from the same standpoint, which is they love this country and they're trying to get to the right answer. They might have different legal tools that they use to get to the answer that they believe is the correct legal answer, but they, the job of a clerk, which is to help sort of distill the arguments and sort of talk through the arguments with the justice, is very much the same. What I love about clerking for both justices, both have an acute sense that there's an individual behind the case. That was made very clear to me on day 1 of Justice Sotomayor, day 1 of, I initially actually clerked for then Judge Gorsuch in Colorado, and they never lost sight that there were real individuals behind the cases. It never changed how they would rule according to what the law said was the right answer, but they never lost sight that there were real people behind the cases.
It is pretty cool. A law clerk, I'm not sure everybody knows what that is. Does everybody know what that is? Nobody. Okay, all right. Well, it's a crazy thing, but somebody who's just graduated from law school, so you're maybe 23, 24, not that much older than you are now, can get hired by a judge to help them do research and writing in chambers with the judge. And I only get 4. That's my whole staff. I get 4 law clerks every year and some assistants, secretarial assistants too. But my whole staff on law is 4 young people, and they can be you someday. And it's a pretty cool job for a young person to get at the highest levels of our government. And they do it for 1 year so that it rotates over. And it's a great gift to that young person to be able to help launch their career. So it's something to aim for after law school, those of you who are thinking about, okay?
Wonderful to hear about the fact that all of you can aim for it, and also to hear from Janie how both justices approach the job by focusing on the individual. That theme of listening to different points of view and civics and civility was so crucial to the Constitutional Convention. And James Madison hoped that people would listen to citizens they disagreed with, and that was why he adopted the Constitution. Justice Gorsuch, tell us about Madison and civility at the Constitutional Convention.
Okay. Well, we live in a time when people are pretty tough on one another, don't you think? And you think that's unique to our time and place. But it really isn't. And I'm not saying things couldn't be better now. I'm not saying that. They could be a lot better. But the same sort of disagreements were going on in 1776 and in 1789. And in 1789, when the Constitution Convention gathered, about 50 people from all over the then colonies, the states, they weren't sure they were going to be able to come to agreement. Most people thought it was futile, that it wasn't going to work, right? You had big states versus small states. You had southern states versus northern states. You had commercial interests versus rural interests. Big differences in those days. They may seem small to us today, but they were very big then. And one way they made sure that they were going to reach success was by being kind to one another, those people who gathered. They made sure that they had dinner clubs and social clubs outside of the time they were gathered in Independence Hall. And they made sure those clubs included people from different groups. It wasn't just one clique and another clique. Another thing they did was promise not to leak any of their deliberations, that anything you said in that room, the room where it happened, would remain in the room where it happened. And they trusted one another to do that, and that helped them get to an agreement. Is it perfect? No. But it was a heck of a lot better than what came before. And so those are some of the messages that we need, I think, for our own time. And the way I think of it is what my wife's grandmother used to always say. You're going to have a lot of regrets in life, things you did that you shouldn't have done, things that you didn't do that you should have done. But the one thing you're never going to regret in life is being kind.
So well said. Janie, any thoughts about the centrality of civility to the convention?
No, I think Justice Gorsuch really said it so well, but I think to reiterate that when they first gathered in that room, really no one thought they would come to a success. And the only reason they were able to was because they were civil to each other. And I do think that has a great, great message for our times. And I think sometimes it's easy today to forget that our country has gone through great upheaval in the past and has seen enormous disagreements on a very public stage. And Professor Stephen Carter, who writes a lot on sort of civility, wrote an entire book on arguing that we had very few manners for much of our American history. Francis Trollope, a British author who visited the country in the mid-1800s, wrote a whole book that we had no manners at all. And there were very famous disagreements in the past, Jefferson and Hamilton, a duel between Hamilton and a sitting vice president that you may know ended fatally. And so we always overcome it as a country, which I think is a great message for today, where it does seem sometimes like our differences are unique to our times and particularly acute. To remember that we have seen such differences in the past and have overcome them.
That's so important to learn from history and to remember how close we've come to violence and civil war before, but we have overcome it because of this commitment to listening to people we disagree with, to disagree without being disagreeable. The Constitution is made for people of fundamentally differing points of view, as Justice Holmes said, and that's why learning about the Constitution and different perspectives is so important. Justice Gorsuch, I told you about a great example of civility that happened at the Constitution Center recently, where we convened 3 teams of scholars, conservative, progressive, and libertarian, to draft constitutional amendments. And to my incredible surprise, in a week, these very divergent scholars were able to agree on 5 amendments to the Constitution. What did you think when you heard about this project?
Well, Jeff, you left out the first part, which is equally amazing, all right? So, Mr. Rosen. Jeff? He's my friend. I've known him for 30 years. We were law clerks together, okay? That's, so in our 20s, right? I mean,
amazing.
Early 20s. Anyway, we're old now. No, nobody cares. So Jeff got 3 groups, as he said, of very different people together, right? Self-proclaimed progressive scholars, libertarian scholars, and conservative scholars. And you hear people say, oh, our Constitution is outdated. We need a new Constitution for a new century. We don't have very many rights in our Constitution. We should have more. We all hear these things, right? You've heard about these things, right? You may think these things. What's interesting is he brought together these 3 groups of people who said these things from different perspectives. And he told them, okay, you think you're so great. You write the perfect Constitution, the way you want it, each of these groups separately. And you know what they did? Not one of them did their homework assignment. Would this get you in trouble? Yes, all right? They didn't do what they were told. Instead, they basically said what we have now is a really good Constitution. Could it be tweaked? Yes. And here are a few ideas, and they were all a little bit different ideas, right? As you'd expect from those 3 groups. Then he put them back in a room and gave them a week. I'm not sure whether you locked the door and gave them food or water.
It was a Zoom.
It was a Zoom. Okay. All right. But in 1 week, they managed to agree on, was it 5?
Yeah.
5 amendments that all 3 groups could agree on. And I think that's a bit of a miracle, right? And thinking back, I think our Constitution's kind of a miracle. Because think about it, the idea that people could rule themselves, that hadn't been tried with success in world history. It had always failed. Every single time. The notion that they could do it while respecting that each of us is equal, that idea, that's in the Declaration too. And that each of us has inalienable rights that don't come from government, but come from our Creator, right? The right to speak your mind, right? The right to worship as you please. All those rights, they believe, belong to each of us. Those were radical ideas at the time of the founding. Never been thought to be something that could work. And here we are almost 250 years later. And our Constitution and our Declaration, for all their imperfections, are the envy of the world. They're copied by other countries all over the world.
Can I add one more?
Please, please.
This is probably one of my favorite stories in researching the book that I came across from the National Constitution Center. Not only did they come to agreement on 5 amendments, the amendments did not add, for the most part, new rights. They didn't add for a right to free housing or free health care or anything. What all 5 amendments focused on was the structure of government and augmenting the separation of our 3 branches of government. which I think is a pretty cool thing. Then going back to their original homework assignment in creating a new constitution, I remember Team Progressive, when they handed in their homework, handed in their constitution, they said, you know what? We decided that the best way to protect people's rights and liberties is not to add a new list of rights, but actually is to return to the original sort of Enlightenment ideal, James Madison, of these separated powers. And I just thought that was a really, really cool feature of sort of this exercise that came out of it.
It was so striking. And there are voices today on the left and the right that want to break up with the Constitution or trash the whole thing, and none of our teams wanted to do that. As you said, they wanted to mend it or amend it, and all focusing on these questions of constitutional structure. Well, Justice Gorsuch, you mentioned the ideals of the Declaration, and you eloquently began to articulate them. And the big ideas are liberty, equality, and democracy. You can take them separately or together, but what do you want our students on Constitution Day to know about those ideals of the Declaration, liberty, equality, and democracy?
Let's start with the last one, democracy. What does that mean? It means we're sure to disagree, right? That we are going to govern ourselves. Can you guys agree on where to go to lunch today? Probably not if I took a poll. There would be a severe disagreement on where to go to lunch, all right? Do you have different ideas about how we should live? On some of the issues that Janie mentioned, do you have different ideas about good education, healthcare, national defense? I'll bet you do, right? But the idea of democracy is that there's more wisdom in this room collectively than any one of us can come up with. No matter how smart that person is, he can't know everything that all of us know together, right? So Madison, through democracy, was trying to harness the idea that there's wisdom in the masses. And there's a funny story about back in England, and it was at a county fair. And Francis Galton, I think that's right, noticed that there was a guess the weight of the ox contest. And there were a bunch of experts on oxes there, and they all guessed the weight. And then there were just ordinary people. They guessed the weight too. Well, he averaged up the guesses of the ordinary people and compared them to the experts. And you know what he found? That the average of the ordinary people's guesses was closer than any of the experts. That's the wisdom of the masses. And that's what our legislative branch is all about, is harnessing our disagreements, debating, and then deciding, compromising, taking this idea and that idea, and trying it out, right? That's what democracy is about. Liberty, you know that, right? You want the freedom to be you, and to chart your own way in life, and to live the way you want to live. In peace, you can't hurt other people, right? You can't take their stuff, but otherwise you have a right to be left alone and not have people tell you how to live. That's pretty important to all of us, isn't it? That was pretty radical too. They lived under a tyrannical king who told people exactly how he wanted them to live, and even how they should worship God. Think about that, right? Equality. We've struggled on this one. We've struggled on all three from time to time. But they put that in the Declaration, that we're all created equal. And I think of the Declaration as kind of our national report card, right? Those are the three things that you get graded on. How are we doing, right? It's taken a civil war, but Abraham Lincoln called us in the Civil War on equality. He called on the Declaration and he said, look, this is what we said, this is what we promised, and this is what we have to deliver. The women at Seneca Falls, leading up to the amendment that allowed the women to vote, they called on the Declaration too, and they said, you know what? All men and women are created equal. So I think of those three things as our national report card. And are we perfect? No. We're doing a heck of a lot better than most other places on the planet today, and better than most have done across human history. There aren't very many other places that have done as well today.
Beautifully said. Janie, what do you want your daughters and all of our great students to know about those three big ideas of the Declaration: liberty, equality, and democracy?
Gosh, I don't know that I can say it much better than the Justice said it.
Try.
So maybe I'll just add on to it. I was struck in going back to the Declaration of Independence and the history of it, the immense courage it took for those who affixed their names to the bottom of it. And it's something that I think we forget now. But at the time, to declare the country's independence from Britain was an act of high treason. And all of the men who signed their names said, if we lose this war, all of us will hang. All of us will be put to death. And there's a sort of funny joke that one of them said in the middle, and it was sort of one of the more rotund members said, he pointed at one of the skinnier members and said, I will have a great benefit over you because when I am hung, I will die in a minute or two and you will sort of wave lightly in the wind for an hour or two. But they really truly believe that if the war that ended poorly, that they really were signing their death warrants. And that to me is remarkable because all of these men, as many scholars have written about in the past, had everything to lose and really nothing to gain by doing this. These were all folks who, by adhering to by being loyal British subjects, could have gained much from the royal crown, and they turned their back on that for all these promises to really sort of hand down to us today. And I think remembering their courage is important.
She did better than I did, didn't she? Yeah. One of the funny stories, though, along those lines. So some of those men who signed the Declaration lost their lives, their sons, their homes, and many of them were impoverished after the war. One of them, Thomas Nelson, is his name, he had a house in Virginia. And it was when Washington was chasing British troops really out of the country toward the final victory at Yorktown. And Nelson saw that his house was being occupied by British troops. And Washington's troops asked him, can we fire on your house? And he said yes. And you can see the cannon marks in the walls of that house to this day. He died a very poor man after the war. So poor that his body had to be buried hidden because his family was afraid that his creditors, people he owed money to, would come dig it up and use it as collateral. And on his deathbed, he was asked, what do you think about all this? It turned out pretty badly for you, didn't it? And he said, I'd do it all over again.
Wow. Let's now talk about the ideals of the Constitution. And three of the big ones are separation of powers and federalism and the Bill of Rights. And let's take those one by one. Justice, why is separation of powers important?
Okay. Well, how many branches do we have, guys? 3. Thank you. I'm so glad. I know my 15-year-old daughter got that wrong when I asked her. I thought she would have gotten that from me by osmosis, if not in school. So teachers, thank you for getting that answer right. We have 3, right? Let's take them one by one. Why do we have them the way they are? The legislative branch, we kind of talked about that already, right? What do they do? What's the legislative branch do? Somebody raise a hand. Tell me. Yes, sir. They make our laws. Now, why do we have a legislative branch make laws, and why is it composed the way it is? It's composed of your elected representatives, the people you vote for, right? Because in a democracy, right, we make the laws, right? What are the first 3 words of the Constitution? We the people are sovereign here, not a king, not a communist dictator, not a fascist dictator. We the people are sovereign. And so our elected representatives make our laws. And so they get elected at staggered terms from time to time, right, in 2 houses. Okay. Now the executive branch, what are they supposed to do? Who can give me a hand? Yes, sir. They execute the laws. Their duty is to faithfully execute what Congress has done. Now, we have one person who does that. Why do we have one person rather than like a committee or a whole bunch of people like in Congress? Well, the idea is that once we've decided what the law is and we've tapped the wisdom of the masses, we want somebody who can vigorously enforce the laws. So he doesn't have to report to a committee. He just does it. Okay? One person. That was the idea. And then my branch, the judicial branch, what do we do? Who wants to give me a hand? Yes, ma'am.
Declare if the law is unconstitutional or constitutional.
Well, that's part of it. That's part of my job. Who else has got a hand? Nobody? Thank you, ma'am. We interpret the laws in cases and controversies. So when you file a lawsuit against you, and you say, I win under the law, and you say, no, I win under the law, somebody has to decide that dispute, right? Otherwise, guess what happens? You start getting in fights, right? So you have to have somebody who says, no, the law it means what she says, and not what you know, no. And that's what judges do, right? And for that, we don't have elections. Would you want an elected judge deciding what your rights are or what your rights are? Maybe, maybe not. But here's the reasons why our founders thought not. They thought that sometimes the unpopular person should win under the law. Once we pass our laws, everybody gets their benefit equally. Everybody. And if you have a judge who has to answer to elections, what happens? The popular person might win more often than the unpopular person. So that's our separation of powers in a nutshell to me.
Beautiful.
Janie,
It's the separation of powers?
you want to say more about
And I
separation?
think that's perfect. I would say maybe the one
Please.
small thing, not quite separation of powers, but even within some of those branches, they still kind of divided powers, pitting ambition against ambition. So even within Congress, they had, not just one body making the laws, but they had the Senate, right, and the House of Representatives. And the Senate has longer terms, House of Representatives smaller terms. And they really thought that laws, while essential to liberty, could also work against liberty. And so they wanted to make sure that each new law that was enacted by Congress was done so deliberately, taking in the entire country's voices, and that minority voices were also protected. And I think that's a brilliant feature of our Constitution, this sort of idea of pitting sort of power against power and ambition against ambition.
Wonderful. Federalism.
Federalism. Before we get to that, though, why separate powers? Why do it in the first place? Anybody want to think about that? Give me a hand. Why not just have one group do it, like a group of experts or something? Yes, ma'am, in the very back. I think there's a lot of truth in that, right? That Janie mentioned pit ambition against ambition. Do we assume that everybody's an angel? No, I don't know any angels. I haven't met many, maybe my wife, right? But other than that, there aren't very many people who are totally selfless, right? So James Madison, who wrote the Virginia Plan and worked on this, thought that people are naturally ambitious for power and that you had to break power apart. And so do you expect a democratic system to be a little messy and to have disagreements? Yep. That's a feature, not a bug. Okay? You're gonna have the president disagree with Congress? Mm-hmm. Is that what he wanted? That's exactly what Madison wanted. He said better decisions are gonna come of it when you throw all the ideas in the hopper and people fight with one another politely. Okay? That was the idea. All right, federalism. More separation of powers, right? What's federalism mean? Who wants to help me with that? Oh, somebody can give me a hand on federalism, please, come on. You've spoken, you've spoken. Give me, there's a hand. Is that a hand? That's a hand. You, what's federalism?
Federalism is the principle of...
Go ahead.
I have to play with my hands, but I appreciate it. Federalism is the principle of, I believe it's, that's elected representatives, or generally, no, I'm stuck, sorry.
Okay. Okay, here we got a hand in the back.
She sent me an email, it said the sharing of powers between state, local,
Exactly.
federal government. She emailed me that.
Well, good for you.
She was too afraid.
No, well, thank you, thank you. You've been outed, but that's exactly right, okay? We have some power we give to the federal government, but do we give them all powers? Can they do everything? No. We have states too, right? And are states supposed to have a lot of governing power over how we live our lives? Yes, right? Federal government does things like interstate commerce, like our national defense, things like that. What do states do? Things like divorce law, family law, crime, those sorts of things. The stuff of our daily lives, right? Protect us, police. Why do we have that separation of powers? Same idea, right? Are different states going to want to live differently and make different decisions about education, right? For example. For sure. And so Madison saw this, and our framers saw this, and said one way we can help people live together is not only by bringing all the ideas together in a room in Congress and hashing them out, but also by creating little Congresses, right? Is New England different than the South and the West? Oh, yeah. Do they have different concerns? I mean, you guys are from Pennsylvania. I'm from Colorado. Totally different places. They're both beautiful and great fly fishing in both of them. I love to fish. But at any rate, that was the idea, was that maybe we can all live together better if we can also live a little bit differently.
Wonderful. Well, we're almost out of time, and we always end on time at the NCC, but we can't end without asking you about the Bill of Rights.
The Bill of Rights. Jay, you want to go first on that one?
No, absolutely.
Okay.
All right. So the Bill of Rights. So I guess following the justice asked a question, the original Constitution as it was signed include a Bill of Rights? Anyone? No hands? Did it have a Bill of Rights on it? No, did not have a Bill of Rights. So many of the founders, including James Madison, did not think a Bill of Rights was important, not because they didn't think the rights that we now have in the Bill of Rights were unimportant, but they believed that they would be protected by the separation of powers. And it was only until after that they got together and they sort of wrote down these Bill of Rights. And they believed that a Bill of Rights without the sort of, the separated powers behind it would be nothing but a blank sheet of sort of promises, not blank, but it would be a sheet of promises. And so there are many countries around the world, I know the justice likes to point to North Korea, that has a long list of rights.
It's the best one.
Yeah, the best one, right? It has a right to public housing and free health care. It has a right to relaxation, and it's sort of not working out that well for them because there's nothing protecting those rights. And so I think that's so, but anyway, but they got together and they created these Bill of Rights, many of them, as you know, right to free speech, right to be sort of protecting your home from unreasonable searches and seizures, right to a jury trial, which was also actually mentioned in the original Constitution. That's how important they thought the jury trial was. And over the years, we've added additional sort of amendments to the Constitution. But that's sort of what the Bill of Rights was.
Do you know?
Fundamental.
Sorry.
Yeah, no, go for it.
Do you know who got the last amendment to the Constitution passed? His name was Greg Watson. He's not much older than you are. It was in 1992, 27th Amendment. 27th Amendment had to do with congressional pay. It said Congress can't raise its pay immediately. It has to wait for an intervening election. It can pass the bill, but it can't take effect till after the election. James Madison wrote that for possible inclusion in the Bill of Rights, but it didn't get fully ratified. And Greg Watson was a college student in Texas, and he wrote a term paper and said, I think this is really interesting. It's not that far away off ratification, and maybe we could get a few more states to approve it, and it would become part of the Constitution. And you know what his teacher did? Gave him a C. Said that was the craziest idea ever. And you know what? That really got Greg Watson angry. It lit a fire under Greg Watson, and he started writing letters by himself to state legislatures across the country saying what he had written in his term paper. And you know what they did? A lot of them thought it was a good idea, and they ratified it. And in 1992, Greg Watson got the 27th Amendment to the Constitution adopted. And he took his term paper back to his teacher, Texas. Said, what about that C? Became an A.
Part of what I love about the National Constitution Center is, so let's say the First Amendment, right? You have a right to free speech. What does that mean, right? And what the National Constitution Center does, which is so cool, is it will have online an essay written by a scholar of the Constitution on here's where everyone agrees about this amendment, about the right to free speech. And then they might have two other scholars who say, okay, here's where people disagree on the amendment, right? Because there are active disputes about what all of these rights, where the boundaries of them. But we all agree on like a core set of rights that each one really does protect. So if you have a moment, I think this is a really cool feature of the National Constitution Center, sort of see, here's what we agree on about these rights, and here's sort of at the limits where there's sort of some disagreement.
Absolutely. It just models the civics and civility that we've been talking about. And friends, that's your homework for Constitution Day. And it's not just for Constitution Day, it's for your whole life. Be a lifelong learner about the Constitution. Go to that interactive Constitution, pick a provision you want to learn more about, look at the arguments on both sides and make up your own mind. And now we're going to all go upstairs, and we're about to launch in an hour a new Constitution 101 course that the National Constitution Center has done with Khan Academy. Some of you may know Khan from your math and science homework. This is a civics course that brings together the top liberal and conservative historians and scholars and thought leaders in America to teach the essence of the Constitution. It's so exciting. And it's for high school kids, and I know whatever level you're at, you'll learn something from it. Pick something to learn about, dig in deep, keep reading, keep learning, and let's all keep the Constitution together. And please join me in thanking Justice Gorsuch and Janie Nitze.